Hello, this is Lauren Deeg. I am an Associate Professor of Urban Planning at Ball State University. Excited to be sharing this research with you for Society Spaces and Screens Conference. I'm going to be talking a little bit today about Disrumpo in the Vuja day, breaking the doldrums of screen time to enhance urban design and development futures. A little bit about Disrumpo is a Latin term where we get our English term of disrupt. Means to cause, to break apart, off of, or shatter, burst, split, or disrupt, or sever. Vuja day is a term coined by the comedian George Carlin, and that is intended to be the opposite of the term deja vu, that unfamiliar situation that suddenly looks familiar, but that's something that is familiar appears unexpectedly strange. So intended to be the opposite of the term that we know of deja vu. Haptic refers to relating to the perception and manipulation of objects using the sense of touch, so using our hands or hands-on activities. And as we look at the question of society, spaces, and screens and the relationship of those three things, they all arguably seem to be converging into the cultural zeitgeist. But at what cost? At what cost are we merging these three things, society, spaces, and screens, at the rate and the perception of what we're gaining or losing from it? And if we look back into some of our recent history, just between 2005 here, the funeral parade of Pope John Paul, you can see a couple of mobile devices, and between that particular funeral parade and the introduction of Pope Francis in 2013, the number of devices or screens that folks had been procuring and using in their daily life had increased significantly. And the same token, those of us in the recent past who are old enough to remember, the number of devices that were used in a technological fashion for our entertainment and recording and information work have largely merged, and so we could question here whether life has gotten more complicated, more complex, or if it's gotten, in fact, simpler by the fact that multiple devices have been merged into one. One thing that has changed, though, is the nature of our public space and our public gathering and our public life has changed dramatically. This is an image from the summer of 2018 when Pokemon Go had taken over the consciousness of many folks across the world. So the number of mobile devices had more or less taken over. So some good societal questions to be asking at this particular time. And furthermore, as Apple Vision Pro released their new devices, the question of the integration of these devices into our daily life will continue to be an important question as we move forward. However, and in terms of how we approach education and learning, the relative health of our students and learners, physical health and mental health, does bear into question how much time they are spending in front of these screens. Some research coming from Ed Week via Sarah Sparks, noting some of the impacts of screen time and student behavior, in particular during lockdown and the attempt for education to use more screen time, more Zoom or online offerings. And so we've developed a few activities that have been inspired from the Texas Rangers, which were a group of design teachers in the 1950s, as well as the hackathon process from software engineering. And then relating it back to central Indiana, where volleyball is quite popular, one activity that I've developed in the studios is to have students trade desks and perform different operations or hacks to their design projects so that they can receive a fresh eye approach to what it is that they're doing and learn from each other's comments and reviews and even physical actions in the design activity. So that frequently in two-dimensional design allows us to trade pieces and try out different arrangements or different things. Things were pretty common for things to be doing around a round table or around a large studio. Were pretty common before COVID, and so this notion of trading places or trading pieces allowed us to explore a lot of different design options and really opened up students to different paths of creativity. During COVID, however, this is one of our first disrumpos, if you will. The COVID-19 response on the part of our university required us to create some social distancing in the part of the studios, and that included a lot of barriers, sneeze screens, a lot of visqueen, plastic being put up, and every other desk was used between a morning shift and an afternoon shift so that we could maintain a 6-foot distance. And so students were very much not as closely knit as one would perhaps expect before. To replicate that particular process digitally required a little bit of creativity on the part of the instructors, because we did not want to welcome the virus as an unwelcome collaborator. And so using concept board, a digital review board process, I was able to replicate a two-dimensional collaborative design activity that involved 9 cutouts of different tiles. And so setting that up in a digital review board allowed myself and my students to come up with 4 different rounds of possibilities for this particular two-dimensional design. Was this effective as it was to be in person, or to be changing or desks, or to be trading pieces? Students responded very positively given the conditions we were given, and I think they understood the opportunity or the differences that we were placed. And I think we're accepting of the conditions that we were given. To have any form of in-person class for that particular semester of fall of 2020 was better than not. They did understand the differences there because they were coming directly out of high school. And so they enjoyed the activity in the way that they were able to interact on the digital board and come up with new ideas and fresh ideas for this particular two-dimensional design, but also did understand that we were put into the position with social distancing requirements that we were doing the best we could. A Vuja day that we experienced, or that sort of return to the collaborative studio practices post-pandemic, we were able to come back to the studio, use each other's workspaces, trade spaces, trade tiles, trade pieces, if you will, and that close collaboration, as well as sharing of that space, was very effective. Something we try to replicate digitally, but certainly much easier to do that when we are back totally in person. And we also, you can see a student recording, reflecting on each of the steps on sort of a journal, so that every student, when they return to their desk, has a record of some of the things that we did. I then asked students what they thought of this in terms of returning to this in-person or close-knit space versus doing it digitally. And the comments now in 2024 are very interesting, because many of them spent time in lockdown or spent time in online classes in high school. The experience that students had in lockdown, though, is still very much on their minds. And as we can see here, that they really do enjoy the ability to collaborate in person and see immediate results. And even say that they probably would have lost patience if it were online. One student here definitely has feelings about remote education, and given that they did in fact spend quite a bit of time in remote learning. Final results: multiple students, we were able to exhibit several of the effects and have a pretty striking exhibit in our building following all of this particular design exercise. Another Disrumpo, the ability or the question of how to tell the clear story of urban planning and development to new audiences. As many of you know, enrollment is down across multiple programs, and so we are raising the bar in terms of, or rising to the challenge of increasing our enrollment and maintaining enrollment. And so how do we tell the story of urban planning as a profession to an undergraduate audience is one of our new challenges. And it's in terms of how that profession is calculated and communicated at any time has always been a challenge. Looking at a model here, we can see how the cartoonist Edward Sneed is satirizing the notion of looking at a model and how one looks at a model at the urban planning scale. So the challenge of visualizing and communicating urban planning concepts is as old as arguably as old as the profession itself. And as our cities change so rapidly, here's a comparison in Charlotte, North Carolina, over a 15-year period. We are rebuilding, re-densifying, re-inhabiting our cities in totally different ways. Means that educating the public about urban planning concepts is all the more important. Our Vuja day here in this case is that older methods of public participation and visualization still work, but they are in fact enhanced by new technologies. So here's an example from Taylor Swift Williams Group using an equivalent, if you will, of Athenian democracy, using bingo markers here to drop into the slots for each of these survey markers. And what's interesting about this analog version here is that this allows Taylor Swift Williams Group to launch the exact same questions and the exact same responses with an analog version as well as a computerized survey. And so these hybrid or these combined methods of surveying became necessary for planning professionals during the pandemic and even worked pretty effectively afterwards. Interesting example here from Vardahagen Architects out of Oslo. They use tape to replicate a floor plan in their building's courtyard, which allows their clients to do full-scale walkthroughs of the floor plan. Floor plans and city plans are very difficult for members of the public to visualize, and so again, these are very old methods of generating or communicating a plan, but using the full-scale tape-up measured drawing allows the clients to visualize their space much more effectively. New technology is making that more possible. Hewlett-Packard is developing site print robots, which will print out a floor plan onto a floor, and that allows both clients to help visualize, but also allows contractors to install fixtures and systems and walls in the appropriate places for every floor of a building. Our next Vuja day is how to develop a planning exercise that communicates land uses and massing with simple materials and haptic exercises and divergent thinking with young people. Again, we're trying to attract and consider our enrollment and intake of students and tell what urban planning is. So we found that sponges are quite effective for communicating different land uses because they follow a land use-based color system, which is typical for GIS and mapping exercises. And so we've used cellulose sponges to help consider the future of a neighborhood very close to our college campus. We've tried it a couple of different ways with a couple of different materials, not just sponges, but also using things like straws and pipe cleaners and string to communicate environmental systems and transportation systems, and just found that the ability for students to collaborate and discuss the stacking of things and the layering of things is becoming really exciting and really effective. But the ability to touch and move things around in that haptic fashion is very nice. So we've used these exercises in a couple of different scenarios with college students, with community members, high school students, and even existing students. They find the ability to depart from the computer screen and try things out three-dimensionally to be helpful. So we're finding that everyday materials can work very well. I've even taken sponge models into the regular undergraduate studio, and through a series of rounds, we can very quickly, in approximately 2 to 3 hours, study one of the underutilized portions of our city that's now open for development. And so in the process, you can see a smaller scale model here, in a process of approximately 2 to 3 hours with 15 to 16 students, we can generate some fast possible solutions for the revitalization of an underutilized district. Because we can generate those ideas quickly means that there's more time for craft and refinement. And you can see students here communicating floors and existing buildings versus new buildings, and new public spaces versus existing spaces in a pretty advanced fashion at the smaller scales. And the students, as they go from a sponge model to a more refined model, it's amazing how well-crafted and well-refined their ideas become. Going back to the computer, because we were able to generate critique ideas so quickly, means that we can use screen time more efficiently. And while students are digital natives for this particular generation, and while students are asked to bring a computer to the studio, and while we do teach them computer drawing methods and diagramming methods and software methods, that haptic experience of creating an initial idea with a sponge model and with a physical model greatly enhances their screen time, but also they use that time more efficiently. So thank you for this conversation and the ability to share this with you. I encourage all of you to go create the world that you want to live in, and look for the ways that that help engage people in the question of urban design and planning in their communities.